the friction between the union and the state government. Will this not affect the growth of the state?
Certainly, it's not only the state, actually, it's a country. About our welfare policies, about our freebie program, how do we distinguish between the freebie and the welfare? So Tamil Nadu is kind of traveling on this track for quite some time, where we are unable to make a distinction between whether this policy is a welfare policy or it's a freebie. And the self-help groups, I want the government to take an assessment of that. In the last 10 years, if there are no critical questions asked, then you are turning the welfare program into a vote bank schemes, actually. So this is the danger. There is no kind of follow-up of the thing. There is no tracking of a thing. And the best example is the women's self-help groups.
Sir, Chief Ministers of Tamil Nadu, whether it was former Chief Minister Jayalalithaa of AIDMK or the current Chief Minister Stalin, they come up with a big vision. They say, in the sense, they project they would be able to grow the state in a big way. For example, Jayalalithaa released vision document, what Tamil Nadu would attain, the growth in 2030, 2040, like that. And the current Chief Minister, Stalin, promises the state would be a 1 trillion economy in 2030 to 31. So, do you think the Dravidian leaders, the Chief Ministers of Tamil Nadu, they project these kind of long vision to project their image, or do they really care for the growth of the state?
I think certainly it's when you say policy planning or even 5-year plans or annual planning, it's all part of the projection. So I don't see anything wrong about having a wish list or a projection for the state or a vision statement for 2030 or 2035. Certainly BJP has vision for the party and the country. And so is Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam, led by Mr. Stalin as well. So the vision statement is quite welcome for any state or political apparatus. But then, whether it is realistic to project something like 1 trillion. He has been talking about 1 trillion economy for quite some time. For more than 3 years, he has been talking about 1 trillion economy. And it's achievable and it's workable, and with appropriate planning and then very efficient teamwork, it is possible. But there are other concerns about where the deficit, not only the deficit budgeting, but is about where the overspending happens, where there's the non-returnees, where you don't find any returns to the state. So those things have to be identified. And then in terms of the waiting time, the project implementation, cost cuttings involved in all this. So I always believe that when you are projecting a kind of growth, when you're projecting a certain kind of a budget, and the government should also focus on the cutting down the existing weaknesses, shortcomings and excesses in the budget spending or in the policy view itself.
For the last 5 years, the DMK government actually faced a very tough time in getting funds from the union government. And the government led by BJP, they were tight-fisted, and they even did not give the RTE funds.
Yes.
Because Tamil Nadu did not accept the new education policy, all that. So, don't you think it would deter the growth of the state if the state government continues to fight against the union government and gets minimum funds? In the long run, probably in this 5 years, it's gone, but if in future, if this continues, the friction between the union and the state government, will this not affect the growth of the state?
Certainly, it's not only the state, actually, it's a country. We have to see about it. Whenever the center denies a kind of a share of its budget meant for the state, if it does not think, the state government is under pressure, but certainly it affects the overall growth in the country. And when the center refuses to give allotted money, whether it's a RT fund or like, the education budget in certain sectors. And if they don't give this money to the state, if the state is fighting, but the result is like not only the people of the state in Tamil Nadu are affected, the people of this country are affected. So the center also has to have this worldview. And then, like, I understand the question that you ask about, like, when the center is itself very tight-fisted about providing money to the state, why state government is undertaking certain populist programs and schemes resulting in huge expenses thing. Is it necessary? But that's always like debatable. That's always a debatable, and I see that as a very relevant question. But the point is that, like, if the state loses its sharpness to project certain a new vision, new demands for its own people, then, like, there is nothing afresh to look in politics actually. And but we have to become much more what I would call self-examining about our welfare policies, about our freebie program. Like, how do we distinguish between the freebie and the welfare? And, like, is welfare policies are populist, or is our welfare policies are like, human development oriented, or like, basic human needs oriented part? As long as it remains as part of, as within the human needs and human development thing, its welfare has a relevance. But it tends to take away the human commitment to work and earn a livelihood and preserve its human dignity. That's a freebie, actually. So Tamil Nadu is kind of like, traveling on this track for quite some time, where we are unable to make a distinction between whether this policy is a welfare policy or it's a freebie. But I think the government should be far more responsible in defining this distinction. Defining this distinction rests with the very fundamental idea is that whether it contributes to human development and human dignity in the state, or like, if you simply give money to people and, like, make them depend on the state, it takes away the dignity of the people.
Okay.
So I think the welfare and the freebie is the distinction. I would like to make it like that.
Sir, Tamil Nadu probably would be the forerunner, I think, in giving freebies,
Right.
in populist schemes, whatever the name which we call it. Initially, the color TVs and the mixie, the cycle, the so many things,
Laptops
household
and things.
items,
Right.
and now
The Pongal gifts.
Pongal gifts,
Yeah.
and now there are gas cylinders.
Yeah, see,
They're being offered. And in the last election, AIDMK even offered the washing machine.
Washing machine.
And
what I find very, sometimes it's very, like, self-degrading to imagine, like, number of years back, either we should admit the government, Tamil Nadu government, no, I'm not blaming one party. The political parties in Tamil Nadu will have to ask, see, 20 years back, people did not have enough resources. Like, you have a very efficient, very robust PDS system, public distribution system, and which we didn't have 30 years before. And people didn't have rice, and people didn't have cereal or sugar, and during the festival time. So, like, everybody has to work around the year to make ends meet for festivals. Now, people don't have to work during the festivals. You can take about, even for the government holidays, like the government holiday for Pongal in Tamil Nadu is not just for the Pongal, for you to travel one day before, for you to come back one day late. I think about, like, we are going in a very different direction about understanding what is the populism and where to draw the line about efficiency of time and economy. And I'm not against welfare policies. I want to make this very thing. Anything that can preserve, contribute to human development, preserve human dignity, and the government program stands by that. But the same government program should not rob the human dignity, actually. I think that, we are in a very thin edge.
Sir, can you please explain what is a welfare and what is a freebie? How to
Sometimes,
understand this?
as I mentioned before, any government policy by financial support that helps to improve the development of education, health, and welfare within the family. Like, for example, about certain incentives for to educate the children. I think that's a welfare scheme, actually. Like supporting for educated young women going in for higher education or going for competitive examinations like the UPSC or State Civil Service Commissions examinations. And any incentives is worth it, actually. And on the other hand, that if the government provides incentives to take them any kind of inspiration for them to work, hard work, and to meet certain goals in their life, I think it deactivates about it. And I can say, I'm not kind of when the Mahalir Suyanidhi Suya Udavi Kurukal and Solapadugirathu, it used to be referred as the self-help groups and thing. And the self-help groups, I want the government to take an assessment of that in the last 10 years. The moment we say it might seem like a question against the money going for the women welfare thing, but what that money is utilized as, how that money is circulated. The government has put money in the banks for so many years, actually. So how this money has been utilized by the women? Are they still borrowing? Are the families are still in the same situation? And how this resources that has been contributed there in the last 10 years and 15 years, how the consolidation has happened within the family? How has it resulted in savings, or has it led to kind of a money lending in the rural areas or the semi-urban areas? So these things that we have to kind of if any welfare programs, if there are no critical questions asked, then you are turning the welfare program into a vote bank schemes, actually. So this is the danger, this is the challenge of these policies itself.
Okay. Sir, the current Stalin government, on the one end, they are fighting for state autonomy. They are fighting against the policies introduced by the union government. On the other side, they are providing a lot of freebies, welfare policies. Do you think they are doing this as a balancing act, or they are pushed to do this?
I think on the one hand about you need to fight for your state autonomy, state rights, and the rights in the federal center-state relations. I don't think you can keep that away, actually. So politics is a combination of various challenges, issues, actually. There is no one single issue for the government. And that's what makes politics as a kind of a pivot of the all other activities in a society. So you need to pursue those with the center, vis-a-vis the center. But in case of about the freebies or the welfare policies the governments are introducing, is that you also need to articulate this sector. Like I said before, we always have to ask critical questions whether about the welfare policies not turning into kind of liability. But the reality is that you can only provide welfare policies, you can only provide resources if the state is not going into deep debt trap.
Crisis, yeah.
What you call is if there is no kind of a revenue, a sufficient revenue, and then the debt is growing in a huge way, and then you have to see where the debt, how it can be addressed. And if the government doesn't want to kind of reduce the welfare schemes, but then you have to see augmentation of resources where it can happen. But usually what happens whenever the state considers that the resources have to be augmented as a revenue, and they think about okay, the registration of land, and then the tariffs, the sales tax, the tariffs, and all this can be increased, and very, very common strategies of thing. But What I personally think is that, the government can see when whatever welfare policies is introducing, if this policies resources it puts into that thing, it can be recycled within the community actually, not just given to the self-help group, but see how that money is being utilized and follow the money. The government never follows. In the last, not only the state government in Tamil Nadu, but the governments all over the country, the state governments across the country, is that they think the money is given to the people, whether women or men or to the other, and accepting the banks if they give a loan. I'm not saying give it as a loan, but then if you're giving it as a welfare scheme, but how it has benefited the welfare the orientation.
That should be a comprehensive study
Yeah,
on this.
there is no kind of follow-up of
Track
the thing.
them.
There is no tracking of a thing. And the best example is the women's self-help groups. The women's self-help groups in this country. And so then the government also knows, this is part of our vote bank and women vote us actually. So I think this attitude has to change.
Okay.
And I always believe if you provide good education and if you provide good health care and about basic employment opportunities, and I don't think we are talking about freebies at all. People don't want you to give free. But if people are very happy when you give free, introducing policies transferring money, then about and people are not going to be grateful to the government. Why should they be grateful? We think about even for the elections, like a vote bank thing. Our problem in this country is not about lack of resources, human, technical, financial, everything we have. But there is something called the converting all this into a working relationship, enabling this to deliver. That means we don't have an implementation mechanism. We don't have an
There's no accountability.
We don't have something called accountability in a system.